Okay, Mitra, it's great to talk to you. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about The Insider, which is your latest short film commissioned by the Coronet and made in collaboration with the writer Ben Okri. But you've also got a new book out off screen published by the German publisher Kerber, as well as your first feature film, Golam, in distribution. Let's begin, though, with The Insider, your 6-minute film, based on Albert Camus' book, The Outsider, written in 1942 and set in French colonial Algeria. Meursault is a stranger to his own life. He's indifferent to everything. His life has no meaning, yet we know absolutely nothing about the Arab, who he kills. The Arab does not even have the dignity of a name to call his own. In 2015, the Algerian journalist and writer Kamal Daoud wrote a novella called The Meursault Investigation. Camus' story, in fact, told by the brother of the man who's shot. This human being does have a name, and here he's called Moussa. Daoud has this to say, that unlike Meursault, quote, who knows whether Moussa had a gun, a philosophy, or sunstroke? He says, I want to tell the story Moussa was never able to tell. It's simple. The story we're talking about should be rewritten in the same language, but from right to left. End of quote. Did Daoud's work also shape your film alongside Camus and Okri?
I was aware of Kamel Daoud's book and his ideas, but the commission happened with short notice. I didn't get the chance to read it in advance. I only read it afterwards. And it's interesting you mentioned Daoud's idea of rewriting the story from right to left. I don't speak Arabic, but I knew the language is written from right to left, as in Farsi. So I started the film with a long pan on the city from right to left, and then the camera continues on the sea going from left to right and stops on the dead man, creating a dialogue between the two languages.
Oh, that's interesting, Mitra. I mean, can you also tell us a bit more about the collaborative process of making the film?
It was a pleasure to work with Anda Winters, the artistic director of Coronet, who commissioned the film, and Ben Okri. Both had a great understanding of the project, and I agreed that the film needed to be simple, succinct, and perhaps rather abstract. It was a challenge to shoot in North Africa, reference permission, etc., and to complete in 4 weeks, the time we had before the opening. But I was very lucky to have a great team on board and worked with some very talented filmmakers and artists. Zadok Nava, who produced the film, Andy Lambert edited and designed the sound, Oliver Curtis, who shot the film, and Fred Mamar Fortas, an Algerian in exile himself, who narrated the story. Each brought something really interesting into the film, so it was a truly collaborative project.
That's interesting as well, Mitra. Well, it is a very beautiful voice and the way that the story is told. The book is a very short book, and the sentences are sparse, very precise, very simple too. And certainly in Okri's iteration, the story is told from the perspective of the dead man himself. Okri's script is very poetic, and he gives the character a voice and a name, Mahmoud. And Mahmoud's voice is the only voice we hear in the film. How did you go about translating what's a mesmerising text into a mesmerising visual register?
This was a rather difficult project to realize, considering the subject, concept, and the fact that it had to be short and specific to serve the play. So I decided on a more abstract approach, structuring the film in 2 parts. The first part is the long shot of the city, the sea, using Ben's powerful text as uninterrupted voiceover, indicating the dead man's point of view. Ben's text was so beautifully written, I didn't want to interrupt. So the voiceover keeps going, if you like, and the camera keeps going. In the second part, the camera is static, with shots of the beach, the sea, rocks, and the sun, edited together using mainly as the natural sound, i.e. the sound of the sea, wind, birds, etc., which were reworked as soundtrack, and a bit of the flute that in the book Meursault hears or imagines when walking on the beach prior to the killing. As the film progresses, the shots become faster and the sound more exaggerated, distorted, and he did a brilliant job at the transformation from tranquility to chaos, creating an unsettling atmosphere. So the idea here was to indicate Meursault's interior emotional state, his inner turmoil before he shoots the man. And this is done in abstraction without showing him. Whereas in the book Stroke Play, the Arab has no identity, doesn't exist, so to speak. In the film, Meursault is absent, doesn't exist. So the idea is reversed.
That reversal comes across very, very clearly. We then, in terms of the filming, we then see Mahmoud's dead body lying on the beach. It reminds the spectator of so many dead bodies of migrants and refugees, those fleeing the legacy of colonial power, those without what Daoud called magic staffs, or we might call silver spoons. Those so many nameless bodies washed up by the sea in the Mediterranean. And in that particular shot, it's perhaps a grown-up version of the Syrian child, Alan Kurdi, in fact, Ilan Chenou, in terms of naming, or certainly it's a reminder. And I wondered whether or not that was intentional.
Very interesting point. At the time, I was just thinking of a visual interpretation of Ben's text, trying to find a way to tell the story differently. But as Victor Berger, a great teacher, taught us, let the unconscious speak, i.e., any creative practice is partly determined by the unconscious thoughts and ideas, which we may not be aware of at the time, but has significance, sometimes more so than the intention. How could you not read this image as a reference to the tragic situation of the migrants, as you astutely pointed out, with so many nameless bodies washed up by the sea? So I believe this was an important factor in realizing this image. It's interesting, a curator at the Smithsonian, where the film was shown in January, also made a similar point of how the film is open to a wider interpretation, considering the status of the migrants in general with no voice, identity, and so on. So I'm pleased that the film turned out to be both specific and could also be read outside of the context of the Camus play in addressing the current crisis.
Yes. I mean, it's certainly also the film doesn't end with a bang, a single shot of the gun. And again, using your idea of reversal, we see that in reverse. What we see is the dead body first, and it's only later that we hear the shot. Ben Okri's described this moment as a final gunshot that ends all dialogues. And when I was watching it, it reminded me of Emmanuel Levinas's dictum that our accounts with the other, he says, are never settled. So in your film, I think the usual narrative sequence is turned on its head. And at the end, there's a long single take of Mahmoud's face as he returns the gaze, looks us straight in the eye. And at that moment, we as a spectator, we're subject to this look of the other. It's a very arresting image. Is it some kind of provocation?
It is a look that is unsettling, neither angry, accusatory, nor a victim. It's a look, as you said, we can't turn away from. a questioning look, perhaps, directed at Meursault or at us, or both. I wanted to leave the reading open to interpretation. And this was not an easy part. I was looking for a non-actor to play Mahmoud when I met Mohammed Mulfat, a local man on the beach, when I was doing a wrecking. A very proud and aloof young man, prematurely aged, uninterested in the film business or even a fee, despite struggling. So I thought he's the right man. I asked him to play himself, so to speak, as a man who's been through a lot in life, evident in his silent look. And he did a great job, I think.
He does indeed, because Mahmoud fixes us with his look, absolutely unflinching. And the movements are very slight, but also perceptible. We can't turn away, as you say. You know, we are fixed by this look, and this pushes, I think, that shot closer to a photograph, although it's not quite a photograph. It appears, looking at it, I think it appears to be neither photographic nor filmic. And at the same time, it seems to be both. Can you say a bit more about this?
This is an interesting observation. The conflation of whether it's a still or a moving image is rather unsettling, as is the look of the man who stares silently.
That's interesting, Mitra. And that might bring us on to talk a bit more about the film stills in your new book, Off Screen. The book opens with a series of constructed film stills based on your first feature, Golam, made in 2018. Can you tell us a bit more about those images?
I wanted to deviate from the usual approach to the concept of film stills, which are often photographs of the main character or characters taken on or off the set of a film to introduce the film. Inspired by the feature film Golam, that I made a couple of years ago, the work uses the real locations of the film, yet focuses on the rejected cast or the extras, or depicts the empty landscapes with an implication of narrative. In this respect, the images also differ from the usual film stills, which are rarely devoid of people. So the intention here is to present a collection of enigmatic images, which leaves the narrative open to interpretation, telling the story differently or even inducing the anti-story. But as in the film, it portrays a unique image of London, the unseen city of migrants living on the edge. Throughout the film, the main character, Ghulam, remains an enigma. So in these stills, he's not represented by any of the rejected cast, a strategy used to maintain and enhance the mystery echoing the film. The only indication is his whereabouts, the places he's been or heading to, or the hidden danger that await in this deserted landscape, alluding to what happens beyond the frame.
I mean, the book Off Screen is beautifully produced, and it covers your photographic work made between 2012 and 2018. Perhaps you could tell us a bit more about some of the images from your recent projects that you've made, examining not just post-colonialism, but the financial crisis, exile, migration.
In addition to the project Film Stills, the other projects include Looking Back, which is just one large image on the young unemployed, which I made in 2012, when young people were among the hardest hit by the financial crisis. I asked for volunteers, those who were either unemployed or, despite university education, couldn't get a job in the area of their expertise, to participate. The result was a single portrait, yet no one is looking at the camera. It's more like looking into the void, into an uncertain future. I also did a billboard project commissioned by the Art on the Underground, initially as a response to the launch of night trains. I focused on nighttime workers, mainly those in low-paid jobs with 70% migrants, and did a number of interviews to get a sense of their experience of working at night and the impact on their lives. hence the title, You Don't Know What Nights Are Like, which is actually a quotation from one of the participants. And I thought it would make a great title. Leicestershire is another project which also addresses the underrepresented. After World War II, to tackle the economic crisis, the British government encouraged immigration. A large number settled in Leicester. Then it was a centre for manufacturing shoes and textiles, and now immigrants group are nearly half of the city's total population. So the project is really an attempt at a historical documentation and tribute to the ex-factory workers who helped build what was once a major industrial city, but now living on a very low pensions and with their children often jobless. So to go back to the book, despite the various projects, what links them together is the underrepresented and social divide. Structurally, it starts with the latest photographic project, Film Stills, which, as I mentioned, was inspired by the feature film Ghulam, and ends with the actual stills from the film. In a way, it shows the relation between film and photography.
Mm. Yeah, and the book also reverses the usual order of things, because it opens with images and, in fact, ends with writing. Why?
I thought it would be interesting for people to have their own reading interpretation of the images first, without being influenced by the writing. And then the writing hopefully could be informative or inspirational in introducing other levels of meanings. Like a film that you may like to see before reading the reviews, making your own opinion without being guided by the critics. And then read the reviews, and that may provide different insights into the film.
Yeah, I can see that as a thread running through your work. Thank you, Mitra. One final question. What are you working on now?
I'm developing the second feature, The Far Mountains, God knows why, and also have some ideas about doing another photographic project, but both are too early to discuss, really. It's a long shot.
I like it's a long shot. That's a good note to end on. Mitra, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you about your work, and the very best of luck with the future projects.
And thanks very much for your great contribution, Roberta.
Pleasure.